3 weeks ago, I did something I never imagined I could. I handed my parents an envelope in front of 60 people at my mother's 60th birthday dinner. The Edgewater ballroom was glittering with crystal and champagne. Everyone smiling. Unaware that the neat white envelope resting by my plate wasn't a gift, it was evidence. Inside was a police report with both of their names printed under defendants. Dime. My mother's laughter filled the room as she lifted her glass and said, "Nora, my successful girl. What did you bring me this time? Don't tell me it's another bottle of that wine you love." I smiled just enough to be polite. "Not wine," I said. "Something you've been building for 8 years. I thought it was time you finally opened it." Her smile faltered. The kind of twitch that lasts half a second but feels like a confession. My father shifted in his seat, pretending to cut his steak again even though the plate was already empty. Someone down the table asked, half joking, "Is it one of those sentimental things? A letter to Mom?" My mother answered before I could, her voice bright and brittle. "Nora's always been dramatic." "Bless her heart," I said. "Maybe. But tonight I'm just being accurate." The laughter stopped, replaced by the soft clink of silverware against china. Every eye turned toward me, waiting for a punchline that would never come. As I slid the envelope closer to her plate, I felt the weight of every transfer, every late-night phone call, every time I'd told myself this was what family meant. The envelope touched her hand, and for a heartbeat, she didn't move. "Nora," she said quietly, "what is this?" I met her eyes and replied, "It's the truth. Mom, you just won't like how it reads." And before anyone could interrupt, I added, "But if we're going to talk about family tonight, we might as well start with facts. It started with a single phone call on a gray Tuesday evening. 8 years before that dinner, I'd just been promoted to a full-time financial planner. Still proud of my first real paycheck when my phone lit up with my mother's name. Her voice sounded smaller than usual as she said, "Honey, I hate to bother you, but your father just got laid off. They're downsizing at the firm, and we're already 3 months behind on the mortgage." I remember tightening my grip on the phone and asking, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" She hesitated, then whispered, "We didn't want to worry you. You just started your career. I thought we could manage." "Wonan." I asked how much they needed, and she sighed the way people do when they want you to offer more than they'll admit. "Maybe 2,000, she said softly. "It would cover the mortgage payment. But the utilities are overdue too. And your father's medication, well, that's another story." I opened my laptop while still on the call and said, "I can send 3,000 tonight. That should give you some breathing room." Her voice cracked as she said, "You're such a blessing, Nora. Just until things settle down. You've always been the responsible one." I wanted to believe her. Wanted to think responsibility meant safety, not sacrifice. After we hung up, I stared at the bank transfer confirmation on my screen, the number blinking like reassurance. I told myself this was what grown children did. They helped their parents when life got cruel. The next morning, she texted, "Thank you, sweetheart. We can finally sleep." I smiled at my desk, thinking it was temporary. A bridge until my father found another job. When she called the next month saying, "The roof's leaking, and the contractor needs a deposit," I didn't hesitate. I said, "Same amount as last time?" And she laughed lightly. "You always know what to do." I sent the money again, and again after that, until the routine no longer felt like generosity but a reflex. The numbers blurred together, month after month, each one wrapped in urgency and love. Looking back, I can still hear her tone that first night, the tremble that made me think I was saving them. In truth, I was only buying time for a lie that would last 8 years. My apartment back then was barely 300 square feet. Just enough space for a futon that never unfolded right, and a kitchenette with one working burner. Every night I told myself it was minimalist living, though it was really just survival disguised as choice. When coworkers asked why I never joined them for lunch, I'd wave my plastic container and say, "Meal prepping saves me a fortune," while spooning cold rice and beans. The truth was, I couldn't afford takeout after sending the money each month. And my mother never missed a deadline for a new emergency. One evening she called, her tone brisk and urgent. "The water heater's gone. Nora, if we don't replace it this week, the pipes will freeze." I rubbed my eyes and asked, "How much is the repair?" she said. "Around 3,000. Maybe a bit more. But the contractor needs the deposit tonight." I checked my balance rent due. Insurance pending. Barely enough to get through the week, and said, "I'll transfer it now." She sighed with relief and told me, "You're our lifeline. I don't know what we'd do without you." The words sounded like gratitude, but felt more like assignment. A month later, it was the car transmission. "Your father's mechanic says it's shot," she said. "He can't get to interviews without it." I said, "Has he found any openings yet?" And she hesitated, then replied, "Not the right fit. But he's trying." I repeated the same sentence I always did. "I'll cover it this time," she said. "Just until he's back on his feet." And I almost believed her again. By the end of that year, I'd skipped every vacation day, stacked unpaid hours, and eaten instant noodles until the taste felt like routine. Each month brought a new crisis and the same resolution. I'd send the transfer. She'd promise stability, and nothing would change. Looking back, the pattern was so clean it could have been printed on my pay stub, 3,000 out. Reassurance in return, and a silence that felt almost practiced. The photo came through our family group chat late on a Friday night. Lila had written, "Best night ever, Mom's birthday at Canlis," and added a row of champagne emojis. I opened it absently at my desk, expecting the usual smiles and candlelight, but something in the background caught my eye, the edge of a black leather check holder. The receipt just visible inside. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred and whispered to myself, "No way." It's across the top of the card, printed in silver, was my name, Nora Whitfield. I stared at it, certain I must be imagining things. Then looked again and saw every letter clear as daylight. I hadn't been at that dinner. Hadn't even known they were celebrating there. And yet my credit card was sitting on their table. I whispered, "That's my card." As if saying it aloud might change the meaning, I opened my credit monitoring app, the one I used for clients but rarely checked for myself. And the alerts hit one after another. New balance posted. Discover card ending in 7,284, $1,780. Canlis Restaurant, Seattle. Then another. Visa, $2,100. Nordstrom, 3 days ago. My hands started to shake while I scrolled, the list stretching back years. I hadn't opened a single one of those accounts. The numbers piled up until the total stopped my breath. 4 credit cards. 1 personal loan. Nearly $480,000 of debt in my name. I closed the screen and just sat there. The image of that dinner still glowing on my phone. My family was smiling in the photo. My mother's glass raised. My father mid-laugh. And behind them, my name stamped on the card that paid for it all. Marcus was the first person I told. I showed him the screenshots, the photo, the totals. And he didn't speak for a moment before saying, "These signatures, they look copied?" I told him, "They are. My mother must have pulled them from my student loan documents." He leaned closer, studying the pages, and said, This isn't just identity theft. Nora, this is structured fraud. They've been paying minimums every month to keep the accounts active. That's not desperation, it's maintenance. 8. I said. They used my monthly transfers to cover those minimums. It's a perfect loop. He nodded. Self-funding fraud. They used your money to make their crime look legitimate. I asked, can it really last this long without someone noticing? And he said, only if they were disciplined. And it looks like they were. My hands were shaking. But I still managed to ask. What happens if I report it? He said quietly. Then the law takes over. And your parents become defendants. Not family. I stared at the spreadsheet he'd built. The columns of dates and amounts lined up like proof of devotion turned into evidence. You're sure it's them? I asked. Even though I already knew. Marcus pointed to the IP addresses on the application forms. Same location as their house. Same device ID. Same handwriting on every signature field. I said. They signed my name 4 times and thought I'd never notice. He looked at me carefully and said, they didn't think you'd ever check. The office was silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. I looked at the totals again, discover 45000. Visa, 68,000. MasterCard, 39,000. Amex 87000 and said, I thought I was helping them survive. Marcus replied, you were helping them stay comfortable. In that moment, I understood the numbers weren't just mistakes. They were a map of every lie I'd paid for. I called my mother the next morning before I could change my mind. She answered with her usual brightness. Sweetheart, is everything all right? You never call this early. I said. I need you to explain something to me. Mom, there are 4 credit cards in my name. All opened from your address. Tell me I'm wrong. Azan. There was silence. Then she exhaled softly and said, oh, that. Don't make it sound so dramatic. We were just borrowing your good credit. Family helps each other. Ass. I told her. That's not borrowing. It's fraud. You forged my signature. She replied. Oh. Don't use ugly words. You've always had such a sharp tongue. It wasn't like that we just needed a little help to stay afloat. I said. I already send you 3,000 every month. What were you staying afloat from? Exactly? And she answered. Appearances. Nora, you don't understand what it's like to be embarrassed in front of your friends. To have people ask why your daughter makes 6 figures while her parents drive a 10-year-old car. I said. You opened fake accounts because you cared about how it looked? And she said. We raised you. Everything you have came from us. You owe us that much. My throat went dry as I whispered. I owe you love. Not a criminal record. She laughed quietly. You wouldn't report your own mother. That's not who you are. I said. You're right. But maybe it's time I decide who I am. She went silent for the first time. Then said in a smaller voice. You're making a mistake. I said. No. Mom, I made it 8 years ago when I thought guilt was the same as love. Daz. I met Lila at a coffee shop near Capitol Hill. And she waved like nothing was wrong. Before she could order, I said, we're not here for lattes. I have a list of 47 transactions from credit cards opened in my name. Want to tell me why they all lead back to you? She blinked, pretending confusion. What are you talking about? Mom said you knew about everything. You're just upset because you didn't check first. I said, I didn't check because I trusted you. And you used that to buy handbags and vacations. 2. She leaned back, folding her arms. It's not that deep. Nora, you make plenty of money. And Mom said you'd understand. We're family, I said. Family doesn't drain each other's credit lines. She rolled her eyes and muttered, God. You're always the dramatic one. It's just a few charges. I slid my phone across the table, showing her the total, and said, 40,000 isn't a few charges. She looked at the number, then said, You act like you're some victim. But you've always been the lucky one. I just took what was already mine. I have a note, I said. You stole because you felt owed something. And she snapped. I didn't steal. Mom said it was fine. I answered. Of course she did. She needed someone to make her lies sound normal. Lila frowned and said, You're not going to ruin everything over money. I said quietly, I'm not ruining anything. I'm ending it. For the first time. She didn't have a comeback. Just the silence of someone realizing I wasn't bluffing anymore. Marcus came over that night with his laptop and a stack of printouts. He said, I've matched every deposit you sent to your parents with charges on the fraudulent accounts. The overlap is 98%. I asked, So the money I sent to help them was used to pay for their own debt? And he said, Exactly. It's all one cycle. I stared at the spreadsheet. The numbers lined up like timestamps on betrayal. And said, That's nearly $500,000. Is it? He nodded and slid a folder toward me. Here's everything: account statements, IP logs, forged signatures. Even the call recordings where your mother said, It's not fraud when it's family. This is enough to open a case. I ran my fingers along the pages and said, She actually said that out loud? And he replied, Twice. I highlighted both instances. I whispered, Then we're done pretending this was a misunderstanding. He said, If you file, they'll be charged. And it won't stay quiet. I told him, Quiet's what got me here. He said nothing. Just watched as I printed each document, the stack growing heavier with every page. By the time we finished, the table was covered in proof that my family had turned my trust into a business model. I looked at the pile and said, This is what 8 years of loyalty looks like. Right. Detective Ramirez met me in a quiet office that smelled faintly of paper and coffee. She flipped through the folder Marcus had prepared and said, This is solid. Ms. Whitfield. The application logs. The audio clips. The matched addresses. It's enough to open a full financial crimes case. I asked, What happens next? And she replied, We'll file it under case number FC 1027. Once it's processed, subpoenas go out, and they'll know you reported them. I said, They're my parents. And she nodded. That doesn't change the law. I asked if I should expect backlash. And she said, If they contact you, document everything. Do not engage. Identity theft within families gets volatile fast. I told her, I don't want revenge. I just want my name back. And she answered, That's exactly what this will give you: your name, your credit, your peace of mind. She handed me a printed form and said, Sign here to confirm the report. Once you do, there's no taking it back. My hand hesitated before the pen touched the paper. She said, Take a breath. You're doing the right thing. I signed anyway, my signature steady on the line. When she looked up and said, You'll be notified once the investigation is active. I only nodded. The sound of her stamp hit the page. Sharp and final, sealing 8 years of silence into an official record. The restaurant buzzed with chatter and glassware. All eyes fixed on my mother as she lifted her flute and said, 60 years. And I still have the best family a woman could ask for. Lila laughed. And the most successful daughter, too. She could buy this whole place if she wanted. My mother smiled toward me. Oh, She's far too humble for that. Nora's success is our greatest pride. I set my fork down and said, "That's funny. I thought it was your greatest income." The laughter faltered. Someone coughed softly as I added, "Since we're celebrating honesty tonight, I brought something special." "Oh," my mother frowned. "Sweetheart." "What are you doing?" I said, reminding everyone what it costs to maintain appearances. 8 years. 3,000 a month. Does anyone want to do the math? My father cleared his throat. "Nora, this isn't the time." I looked straight at him and said, "You had 8 years to find the time." My mother tried to smile. "You're misunderstanding things again. We've always been grateful," I said. "You mean for the transfers or the credit cards? Because there are 4 of them. All opened in my name. That's not gratitude. That's fraud." "Oh." She blinked and whispered, "You're making a scene," I said. "No. Mom, you made the scene when you sat here drinking champagne on my account." My father reached for my arm. "Let's not embarrass ourselves," he said quietly. But I pulled away. "You already did that when you forged my signature," he said. "We didn't steal from you." And I answered, "You didn't just steal, you built an entire lifestyle out of my silence." The table fell still, the hum of the room dimming as if the air itself waited for what came next. My mother's voice trembled for the first time. "You can't prove that." I placed the envelope beside her plate and said, "Inside are the statements, the signed applications, and the police report. Case number FC1027. You'll find your names under defendants." She froze, eyes darting toward the relatives, now watching in silence. "You called the police on your own parents?" I said. "I filed a report against criminals who share my last name. There's a difference," my father whispered. "Nora, please. Think of your mother's reputation," I said. That's why I'm doing this here. Where everyone can see how far she went to protect it. Example it." Lila stood, cheeks flushed. "You're ruining her birthday," I said. "No. I'm giving her the truth she raised me to value." My mother snapped. "How dare you talk to me like this after everything we sacrificed?" I leaned forward. "You didn't sacrifice anything. You spent my money and called it love," she said. "You'll regret this when they haul us into court," I said. "They already have. The subpoenas went out this morning." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through the silverware, still clinking faintly from another table. I watched her stare at the envelope, her reflection trembling in the polished wine glass beside it. My father's hand hovered as though he could hide the papers before anyone else saw. But it was too late. "You wanted to maintain appearances," I said quietly. "Congratulations. Mom, now everyone knows exactly what you are." No one spoke. I stood, straightened my chair, and added, "You once told me family was about loyalty. Turns out, it's also about accountability." The last sound I heard as I walked away was the envelope sliding across the linen, the soft hiss of paper meeting truth. A month later, I sat in the courtroom, watching the clerk read out the charges. Detective Ramirez leaned over and whispered, "They've accepted a plea deal, 18 months in custody for your parents, 6 for your sister. Full restitution of $720,000. I said, "So they admitted it?" And she nodded. "Every detail. They didn't even contest the signatures." My attorney, Evelyn Cross, adjusted her glasses and said, "The court will seize their assets to repay the amount. You'll recover every cent, though it won't cover what they took from your peace of mind." My father looked older than I'd ever seen him. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, he murmured, "We never meant to hurt her." And my mother cut in, "We just borrowed too long." I didn't speak. There was nothing left to clarify. The judge's gavel struck once, and the sound felt heavier than I expected. Evelyn turned to me and said, "You did the hardest thing, choosing justice over comfort." I said, "I just wanted it to stop." She replied, "It has. Legally. At least. I have it." Afterward, the story spread through our neighborhood faster than I imagined. My parents lost their consulting clients. My sister's business vanished overnight, and their house went up for sale to cover the restitution. Marcus told me. "They'll rebuild, but not in the same city." I said. "Neither will I." He asked, "Do you feel better?" And I said, "Not better, just free." When I stepped outside, the wind coming off the sound carried the faint sound of traffic and seagulls. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like noise, it felt like space. 6 months later, I moved into a small apartment overlooking the water. The walls were bare, the air quiet. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to fill either. I bought a real bed, a second-hand sofa, and one framed photo of myself at 24. The year I first sent them money, I didn't hang it for nostalgia. I hung it to remember the difference between helping and surrendering. Marcus stopped by one afternoon with coffee and said, "You look different." I smiled faintly and answered, "I finally sleep." He laughed softly. "So this is what peace looks like?" I said. "No. This is what happens when guilt stops being a language." He nodded, set the cup down, and said, "You earned it." I didn't correct him, though part of me still wondered if peace was something anyone could earn. Every morning now, I walk along the pier before work, the cold wind on my face reminding me that starting over doesn't have to be dramatic. It just has to be quiet enough to hear yourself think. I don't check my phone for their messages anymore. The silence itself is an answer. What they lost was money and reputation. What I regained was something harder to measure. I kept my name, my credit, and the kind of solitude that doesn't hurt. When I close my door at night, it stays locked because I finally know what belongs to me. If this story stayed with you, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that walking away can be its own victory. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read every word.